recording is going. Yeah. So welcome back to the next session. So welcome, sir. So dear participants, we'll be starting our next session. We have with us Dr. Sarath Utkonda. He is an IIT Kharagpur 1997 alumni and received his doctoral degree from University of Iowa. He is now working as an independent researcher at urbanemissions.info in New Delhi, India, and the developer of the Sim Air interactive models for better air quality family of tools, dedicated for sharing information on air pollution and climate change. He was part of the team which built India's first air quality forecasting system. He is a member of AQI Formulation Committee 2014, WHO's Air Quality Guidelines Development Group 2016 to 2020, and a special advisor to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare's Air Pollution Health Steering Committee. His main research interest is air quality analysis and finding ways to bridge the gap between science and policy. He is a recipient of AGU's International Award 2002, given annually in recognition of furthering the earth and space sciences for the benefit of society in developing nations. And he is the first Indian to receive in this domain. So we welcome you, sir, on the board, and the platform is for you to share your valuable expertise.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. I'm audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Okay, hi, good morning. So I actually have two sessions today. So the morning session, I'll focus on data resources for vehicle emissions analysis in India. This is a talk that I've given on this forum a couple of times. So I tried to add new material into the talk, and hopefully it will be more interesting than it was before, especially for people who are seeing this for the second time. So basically, one of the things that was mentioned just now is the program that we have. We basically build air quality databases for cities, and by virtue of being in India and doing a lot of work in India, so we do a number of cities. So if you go to a website, you will find a lot of these databases are online, especially for India. And this information database includes a variety of things. Now, here you will see that, especially for India, what kind of national guidelines are proposed or already ratified at different levels and different times. So they're all documented. If somebody is looking for just for monitoring data, what kind of resources are available? One is default database, which is basically, let me just go to the website. So you can see the website also, right? Yeah, you can see the website?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I shared the whole screen. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so if somebody goes to the website, we'll be able to find a lot of things. Now, one is official portals. So we try to make it a one-stop thing for anybody to start looking for different information. At the ministry level, you will find general documents on what kind of acts have been proposed. And sometimes it's hard to find the document if you want to look for a PDF. So we downloaded them and kept a copy here, so you can quickly go and download those things. And somebody working in a very particular industry, they want to know what kind of norms have been passed. So we documented some of those. So every once in a while there will be revisions. So we keep track of those and keep updating these documents once in a while. And recently we had this NCAP program, National Clean Air Program. So for the program itself, we built a new set of databases which are for direct use. So for example, even defining as simple as what kind of air sheds, what should be the size, geographical size of a city that we have to consider for building an emission inventory or doing chemical transport modeling, pollution modeling, and things like that. So we pre-designed these air sheds and put them up there. So if once you go to any of these pages, you'll be able to download all this information. This page is for monitoring stations. So how many monitors are required for each of these cities? Minimum monitoring stations required to spatially and temporally represent the pollution levels and the commercial activities and the population density in the city. If somebody wants to download what are the designated air sheds, so sorry, I think it went to a different page. Similarly, we don't know where to find the road maps. So if we officially go and ask the pollution control boards or the Ministry of Road and Highways, Road Transport and Highways, it will be really hard to get GIS files from them. So what we have done is we basically cut the road lines and pre-designated them as primary, secondary, and tertiary roads. So you can get that information at the grid level as a simple CSV file, and then you can start doing your own analysis for any of these. Or if you want the shape file itself, then the shape files are also available for all the air sheds. So we have 131 cities as non-attainment cities, but they are, if you start putting them on a map, they basically come down to about 104 air sheds. So for example, if we're talking about Calcutta, Kolkata, we can't not talk about Howrah. I mean, they're next to each other. So they are basically in the same airshed. Same with the Barakpur as well. It's part of one of the non-attainment cities, but as an airshed level, it will be part of Kolkata. Same thing with Durgapur and Asansol, they will be part of one airshed. So like this, the 131 non-attainment cities became 104 cities. And a lot of these databases are cut for these airsheds, and they are all online for you to download. Similarly, for somebody looking for built-up area, because this is a really good proxy for understanding how cities are expanding, how the road network is expanding, how much, very simple proxy for construction demand. Now, if the built-up area is increasing, then that's a direct, it is a direct consequence for sequence for construction demand. So that's, it could be road construction, or it could be residential area construction as well. So we can use some of this information for for building some of the emission inventories. So these are also included. So over the next few months, more and more databases will be added to this NCAP portal. Similarly, if looking for monitoring data, so where is the monitoring data available in different forms? It could be simple annual averages, daily averages, summaries for different years, or daily AQI bulletins. These are actually issued every day at 4 p.m. by Central Pollution Control Board. And we basically have a link to all these bulletins. Similarly, health impact analysis, what kind of tools are available and what kind of work already done in India that we can use immediately. There are a lot of compiled statistics that are very useful in doing some of this emissions inventory work, not just for transport sector, for any sector. So we compiled as much, we provided links to these compiled statistics, both at the state level and the national level. And some GIS databases, energy databases, emission inventories, which are already available. This is in addition to the inventories that we develop at the city level. The city level work that we have, that's already loaded separately as an APNA base, but these are all globally and regionally available open databases at different scales. And industries, like I mentioned before, there are a lot of reports that keep coming up from different ministries. So we keep track of that and keep updating some of these. And of course, the last one is the satellite feeds. This is what we call as a big data analysis, and not always immediately useful at a very local scale. But if you're doing some regional scale analysis, that's very useful. So we provided some of these links. We have some useful tools as well. that I will try to go over them in the next phase. So as a part of the cities, we develop a lot of these databases and they're all online. So I really encourage you to go and take a look at a lot of these resources. For NCAP, we have the very separate ones, as I showed you. So now, when we talk about emissions and pollution analysis, a schematic would look something like this. It's every stage of this schematic is as complicated as it gets. For example, if you want to just collate GIS fields that could be useful for emissions and pollution analysis, this in itself is a field on its own. A lot of work that can be done, and a lot of inferences can be drawn just looking at GIS fields as well. No, one of the examples is basically looking at the built-up area, how the built-up area has changed over the last 20 years. That itself is a good proxy for understanding what's the rate of urbanization, what's the demand for commercial activities, what is the demand for transport sector, and as in terms of roads. If roads have been doubling every 5 years or 10 years, then it means that obviously the vehicle fleet has also doubled so much. So without actually doing anything, just looking at GIS fields also, you can try to build some stories and start looking for more information. Similarly, the energy consumption data, emission factors, building emission factors itself is a big art. Because fleet changes every year, your road types are different in every city, which means that your real-time driving cycles are different in every city, which means that you can make a test for a particular driving cycle, let's say in Pune, but it may not be 100% applicable to a fleet running on the roads in Kolkata. So it will be very different. So if somebody really wanted to go into building just emission factors, now they will have a full load of work on its own. Again, meteorology. Again, meteorology itself is a huge field in itself, and trying to understand how winds are blowing, not just at a regional scale. Let's say cyclone. If the cyclone is coming, what's the path of that? But even at a micro scale, it's very important. And if the winds are moving from east to west on a particular road, which means that any vehicle exhaust on that road is going to move from east to west at a certain speed. That's a really important information that we need to have if we want to go from emissions to pollution. And again, getting that piece of meteorological information is also a very complicated affair. So every one of these schematics has a gambit of tools, a lot of data resources that are available that can be used for understanding every one of them in that much more detail and that much more thoroughly, so that eventually the goal is to understand this part, right? The source of total contributions, like how much of the pollution is coming from transport, and within transport, how much of the pollution is coming from cars or motorcycles or trucks or buses, and the other pies will be like industries and the cooking and heating, garbage burning, or if there's a dust storm, how much is that contributing? There are fires, especially after harvest season, how much are they contributing? So these kind of things, these are the ultimate numbers that we really want in our hand, that will be on to the policymakers, and they will hopefully make a good informed decision. So this entire schematic is as complicated as it is, but this is all the steps that one may have to be carefully go through, and go through all the resources that are available in building that base. So I'll focus on the transport sector only today. In the transport sector, if we want to do emissions analysis, it can be basically broken down into this fundamental equation. It's a very simple equation. Number of vehicles, which is basically a simple number, vehicle kilometers traveled, which is kilometers traveled by that particular vehicle in a day or a year, depending on the kind of analysis that we're doing, and the emission factor. So emission factor is usually defined as grams per kilometer, grams of a pollutant emitted per kilometer of vehicle traveled. So multiply all the three, then you have your total emissions. If you're doing the calculations on a daily basis, that's basically your answer will be in grams per day. Or if you're doing it in for a year, then it will be in grams per year, and then you make it into tons or kilograms or whatever other units. So basically, in simple terms, it's supply, how many vehicles are there, demand, how much is the vehicle usage, and the technology in place. Now, that's what's driving the emission factor. If you have a Euro 4 car, then you'll have a much better emission factor. If you have a Euro 3, Euro 2, or Euro or sub-zero, then you will have a much higher and different emission factor. That's basically driven by technology. So a fundamental equation to build transport emissions is these three. If you have these three numbers, you can multiply and come up with it. The same thing, this is how it gets complicated when we start adding all the vehicle types, V, and then you have fuel types. You have petrol, gas, diesel, all of them. So every one of them has its own characteristics. Vehicle kilometers traveled. So some vehicles are traveled are less than the other vehicles. So you need to have a variation in that as well. So if you start going a bit more into detail, then you will notice that within cars, your personal cars, which are mostly on petrol, drive a certain amount. Taxis, which are mostly diesel, they drive a certain amount more. So you need to have those kind of variations as well. And the emission factor itself, it will be age dependent, fuel dependent, pollutant dependent, and of course the vehicle dependent and technology dependent. So you have multiple variations of that. So this is a very simple form. These are the three things you need. And depending on how complicated you want, we can start putting more sigma terms to this equation. So ultimately, what we want is something like this. At the national level, where are all the emissions going? This will be very coarse set of analysis. Or with looking at a very particular city, this is a map for the NCR region. Then you'll have a lot more micro definition that goes in to define where are the emissions. Usually they automatically go on to the roads much more than the other areas. So you'll have a variation of that. So depending on the complexity that we want, we basically can go from a simple box model using just three numbers to a complicated set of equations to adding another layer of spatial and temporal variation into the emissions. So, but this is in any form of emissions analysis, this is the ultimate goal that we really want to reach. A small variation I really want to plug in here in this simple equation. The analysis also depends on the data requirements, and data resources needed for analysis also depend on the scale of analysis. If somebody is looking at a road, somebody says that, okay, this is my road and this is 10 kilometers of the road, and we want to translate this into a BRT system. So that's the case study. So which means that your vehicle kilometers traveled is fixed. That is basically fixed to your road length, and your number of vehicles will be the vehicles that go up and down on that road only. So you basically have to do a survey or something to count the kind of vehicles that pass through within that 10-kilometer section. So that will be your input. And depending on what vehicles you see or surveyed on this particular road, then you can decide what is the prevalent technology or what's the mix of technology, and then you come up with a fleet average emission factor and do the analysis. So this is where a lot of things are fixed in a certain way. So the next level is if you're going into a city scale, so we don't really have to do such minute analysis focusing on only 10-kilometer roads. Now the domain itself has become much bigger. So this box is about 80 by 80 kilometers. That's 6,400 square kilometers. Now we can't go to every square grid and start counting how many vehicles are there or what kind of vehicles are moving around. So you need a different kind of resources to then spatially allocate where people could be moving around. So this is where layers of information on where are the highways and how much are they, where are the how many are the main arterial roads or feeder roads, on which most of the autos, motorcycles, and cars will be moving around. So you need that kind of information. You can pick some nodal points to count vehicles, and use that information in, say, some of the programs called for building this origin destination matrix, and you can create a weightage functions to spatially allocate emissions. This is another way. Here, another approximation that you have to do is also on the VKTs themselves. So for example, trucks. The trucks may be coming in and out of the domain every day. And trucks themselves could be moving, say, 300 to 400 kilometers in a day, but they are not moving 300 to 400 kilometers in this domain. So once they get into the city boundary, they're probably traveling from this west end to the center. So that's about 40 kilometers only. And they may be just going out north. So it's another 30 or 40 kilometers. So you have to make sure that you're not using what the surveys say, especially for trucks or long distance buses, how much they travel in a day. So that may not be appropriate for doing something analysis at the city level. So you have to make sure what is appropriate for different categories of vehicles. So this is the kind of approximation that you have to do at this scale. But at the national scale, so we know that a truck starts in Kochi, it will end up in Ahmedabad. So that's in a day, it might have just captured the whole distance. So because the domain is different, then we start looking at everything is at a fleet level. So your numbers are at a fleet level. So you don't really, it doesn't make any big difference if you start looking at whether the truck would have been in Kochi or in Ahmedabad or in Kolkata. So it doesn't make any difference. So you basically start looking at a coarser level on how the movements are. And then there, the proxies like total population density, total vehicle density, total the highway cargo movement, or the shipping industry, from the ships, what's the cargo movement, at the airport, what's the cargo movement. So these kind of things can be a lot more useful immediately in doing at a national scale. So every level, depending on the case study, the approximations have to be slightly different, or your resources will be different, but the fundamental equation remains the same. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So if you keep things simple, then you can keep complicating it as you move upwards. A lot of this work that I'm showing in the following slides actually was done with some staff and the students at the IIT Delhi in the TRIP Center. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So I'll go through different sets of resources that are available that one can use and available for our analysis. First one is the vehicle types. So here, a lot of databases that we have developed actually became part of the Planning Commission's NTTPC. The Planning Commission is the old name. Now it's called Niti Aayog, but this image is actually from the old stages. They have this huge books that we have published as part of that, volume 1, 2, and 3. And a lot of data is actually published in it. Even though it is now 10 years old, there's a lot of information there which is still relevant, especially now going forward if you want to build some scenarios, or both city level scenarios, urban scenarios, regional scenarios. There are a lot of information there that is still very much useful going forward. So one of the things that came out of this committee report is this slogan, "One Nation, One Fuel." So if you remember, before 2014, 2015, we actually had bifurcated fuel use in the country. Now, cities had a much better fuel, at least one grade better fuel than the other regions. For the longest time, Delhi would get a better fuel first, and then after 2-3 years, a few more the metropolitan cities, and then the rest of the country in about 3 or 4 years later. So only from the Bharat stage 4 that things got centralized, saying that, okay, if we introduce a new fuel, it has to be applicable and available for the entire country. Only then we can reap the benefits of the changes that we are looking at, especially on the technology side. Now, otherwise, what happens is you introduce a new vehicle standard, let's say Bharat 4 vehicle, but the fuel is still Bharat 3 outside of Delhi or a metropolitan city, then you don't get the benefits. you may get 30% of the benefits or 40% of the benefits, but you don't get the 100% of the benefits of actually having that. And a grade lower fuel is always cheaper, at least in those days. So people actually prefer to then pump the low grade fuel. There were a lot of instances of that, especially vehicles coming from outside the cities to inside the cities. So they didn't want to pump anything in the city, and they would just pump low grade fuel outside, which is cheaper. So there were a lot of those cases. So to avoid that, one of the things we proposed was the one nation, one fuel policy, and then it was adopted immediately going forward. So right now, like Bharat 6, like everything is Bharat 6. The vehicle standards are Bharat 6, fuel is Bharat 6, and it's the same. Now, the vehicle numbers themselves, we'll go into the types a little bit afterwards. It's also a numbers game. So we really have to keep in mind, if just looking at the numbers, we can see the trajectory of how the vehicles are being treated and how the mobility is being treated in the country. So if you look at the this light yellow, dark yellow line, this is buses. From 2006, if you notice, when we basically hover around number one, like 1 ratio, which means that we really didn't increase the number of vehicles, number of buses, especially in the cities, as much as we should have. We know that the demand has definitely gone up many times, but we never really increased the fleet size accordingly. So it's a very poor progress report when it comes to that. So which means that the public transportation, only on paper, we always keep saying that public transportation is very important. We need to increase it 100%, 200%, but no, it never really happened. So if you look at, on the other hand, two-wheelers have really, they've increased 3 times in the last 20 years. Three-wheelers, they kept steady for some time, but around 2014, 2015, it really shot up. So this flat line was mostly because a lot of cities kept caps on how many three-wheelers were allowed in the city. It was partly some union issue, and also to cap. It was also a competition that came from the taxi unions, but that was lifted, and then these numbers really skyrocketed after that. So for example, even in Delhi, for example, they had a cap for only 100,000 autos for the longest time. And then that just, when they removed that, it just went to like 300. And still there's a huge demand for three-wheelers in the rush hours. Same thing with the four-wheelers. Four-wheelers have, again, with like two-wheelers, they have constantly kept going up only. So about, they about tripled then. The HTV, the heavy-duty vehicles, nationally, there has been a very big flat line, but again, around 2014, 2015, it started trying to pick up. There are a lot more trucks that are coming in, being registered and in use than they were before. So this could be a really good indicator for how the economy is doing as well. So just looking at the registration numbers, we can tell a story on how the policies have been around, or how they have changed over the years. It's really interesting to just talk about it from just one graph. And the vehicle types themselves, it's a very complicated and a messy thing. So if you look at the Ministry of Road Transport Highways annual report, they actually publish these tables every year, but they're always 2 years behind. This is from a report from 2018, but it will have numbers of 2016 in there. And the categories are also very murky. Can't really immediately use it for our purposes, but if you massage it a little bit, they're very useful. You have the general categories of two-wheelers, cars, and jeeps and things like that. Then these omnibuses, tractors, trailers, they come in. In some cases, they don't even mention these. For example, like Bihar, it says like, oh, there are no buses, omnibuses. So it's not true. I mean, if you go to Patna, Gaya, Muzaffarpur, then they have these long distance buses running all the time, but somehow they got clubbed into these multi-axle vehicles or something like that. So every state has their own way of documenting these numbers. So once you get these tables, a lot of massaging is required before you can make plots like these. So we have been cleaning up some of these things, and if anybody is looking at national level and state level numbers, we're happy to share some of those cleaned tables. And using that, you can make some projections. The projecting numbers is basically it's a subjective thing. So depending on our own understanding of how the economy is doing, or how the demand for mobility is in cities and for passengers especially, or how the cargo movement demand is there, we made some projections for different categories, and this is one graph. But this is just an example. This can be from this has an uncertainty of anywhere from 20% to 200%. So we really have to, any projection has similar ranges. So it's a very subjective thing. And now the new website has come out, this Vahan dashboard. They have been, since 2016, they have been posting some of the information at the RTO level. But it's not free, and it's not very easy to download. You can only download one vehicle at one RTO, one vehicle type for one RTO only, and things like that. But if any of the IT people here can manage to scrape things off from this website, there's a lot of information there available, not just from the registered vehicles perspective, but also new vehicles registered, and by vehicle make as well. So if you look at reports like these, here you don't have that much information on whether it's a petrol car or a diesel car, or it's made by Maruti or Hyundai or Honda or something. We don't know any of that information. But on Vahan now, you can even download that granularity for different types of vehicles for makes. So this actually, if we have information even at the make level, then we can have a better understanding of the technology in place in the vehicles, and your emission factor assumptions and estimations will be that much better. So what we were doing 5 years ago, that was the best available then. I mean, now there's a lot more resources available, but with that, a lot of work also increases, but we get much better results than before. These are, again, when we're looking at registered numbers, these are registered numbers only, registered vehicles. So there's a drawback in our registered number system because we register our vehicles for 15 years at a time. And let's say if I buy a vehicle and get the registration for 15 years. So if I sell it to somebody else, let's say in a different state, there you will get a different registration, and you will get another 15 years for that. Which means that the older vehicle registration never really goes away. So there are a lot of these redundant registrations in the system, which are basically leading to some discrepancies in understanding these emissions. So we really have to convert this registered information number into in-use vehicle information. So again, this is a good a lot of work involved in this as well, but interesting work involved. So we basically, I'll give you a little flavor of how do you go from registered numbers to in-use vehicles. Now, this is something that we, a survey that we have put together and use it in many cities to build these techniques. So this benchmarking process it was also done originally as Rahul Goel's PhD work. And now we have applied in about 17 cities across India. The idea is very simple. We do these surveys at the petrol pump. The concept behind that is because if the vehicle is in use, they'll go to the petrol pump to pump petrol now at least once a week. That's the whole idea. So you do the survey at a petrol pump for 1 week, and we've looked at the sample size, and we noticed that by end of the week we start looking at repeats. And the same people who are coming to the petrol station, they actually say that, hey, no, I actually already answered your questions like 3-4 days ago. So then we know that, okay, we are repeating ourselves. So it actually now worked out in a much better way. So we do the surveys at the petrol stations. You do the petrol survey for no more than 1 week. and it's very randomized. Obviously, you don't capture every vehicle that's coming into the station. Over the period of a few hours, you keep doing that. And we ask only 3 questions to whoever is pumping the fuel, and the rest of the numbers we capture on our own. So, for example, surveyor name, date, time, and station number, these are all, you can be predefined, pre-written, and you save them. Vehicle type, we don't have to ask the person, we can see it. Fuel type, whatever they're pumping, we know what they're pumping, we can write it. Occupancy is basically, we look at it, we look at a car or we look at the motorcycle. If there's 1 person, we write 1. If there's 2 person, we write 2. Again, we don't need we don't have to ask anything. Registration number, we can note it ourselves. So we start capturing this registration number so that we can do some back checks on the Vahan website. So in the beginning, we were not doing that, but later on we started doing that. But the 3 questions we do ask the person, if they agree, is the vehicle manufacturing year. So if they say that the vehicle is from 2010, then we know that, okay, it's a 13-year-old car, a 14-year-old car, 14-year-old motorcycle. Mileage, again, everybody is very self-conscious about how much fuel economy that they get. So we ask them, okay, what kind of mileage do you get? Sometimes people give us a single number saying, oh, I get 12, 13, 20, or something like that. Some people say that, okay, if I run AC, I get 10. If I don't run AC, I get 12 or 15, something like that. So we can get some ranges. And the odometer reading. So if they say my odometer reading is 90,000 and the vehicle is 15 years old, which means that on average that vehicle has traveled 6,000 kilometers a year. So we can do some of that as a back calculations afterwards. So we finish asking these 3 questions in less than a minute. And that's the amount of time the person takes to pump petrol, diesel, or gas, whatever they're pumping. And we are done. And it's very straightforward. And we actually had more than 95% success. If people understand what you're doing and why you're doing, some people actually are curious and they ask. Some people, they just tell you these numbers and then go away. But more than 95% of the people have always responded when we asked, and we use that for building these survival functions. The in-use survival functions build this age-dependent vehicle usage functions. So we know that a vehicle which is really, really new, let's say 1 year, 2 years, 3 years old, they've actually traveled a lot more on an annual basis than a vehicle which is already 14, 15, or 20 years old. We've seen some vehicles which are 20 years old, 20-year-old that came to the survey. So the same thing with the mileage. So you can use this to build a age-dependent fuel mileage. So you can build these depreciation curves, deterioration curves for vehicle usage, and we can use that for multiple purposes in the emissions analysis. This is a quick example of stats from Patna. So we did this survey at 10 stations. In 10 days, we finished. Each station, we were there for about 5 days, and total 19 students were trained in putting together this survey. For a couple of days, we did dummy runs, and then we just send them out. So we hang around and make sure that they're courteous and they're answering questions. And then somebody really gets curious, questions get too technical, then somebody will be there to answer those. So we collected about 10,000 data points. These are the most useful ones. Total were about 11,000. So we had to discard about 700 of them. And the share was something like this. Cars, 29%. SUVs, motorcycles, and autos. So in this survey, we didn't look at buses or trucks. So we avoided those in this particular survey, but that was done separately at a different point. So in 10 days, let's say with training and everything, 14 days. So in 2 weeks, we were able to build an in-use vehicle function for city of Patna. And we repeated this in Gaya and Muzaffarpur as well afterwards. A very interesting thing that came out of this is after 19 students, 2 of these students actually got interested more in their work, and now they are staff at the Pollution Control Board in Patna. And so it's very heartening to know that it actually is possible. A quick summary of the results. So if you look at the motorcycles, like 90% of the motorcycles were new in the sense newer than 10 years. And then only 11% were like older than 10 years. And same thing with the SUVs, only 6% were older and 94% were better than 10 years in autos. So when we look at auto numbers, we noticed a big bump in this 2012, 2014. Where this is the bump that I was mentioning about. So we removed the caps, then people started, suddenly more people bought autos. And I mean, we knew that anecdotally, but when we looked at the in-survey numbers also, we were able to see that that big bump there. This is the annual average odometer reading summary. So the annual average was about 7,000, but the variation is about 11,000, which means that this is the variation basically coming from the newer motorcycles are probably traveling a lot more than the older ones. And this is a huge variation of that. If you look at the fleet average age, that's about six years for cars. The same survey. Sorry. So the same survey that was done in Delhi, it came to about 4.5 years, the cars, which means that the fleet turnover in the metropolitan cities actually is much faster than in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So this is a really important point that we can use it when we're doing emissions analysis. So we don't have to use the same survival function that we may find it in Delhi in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, because the vehicles are actually surviving a lot more on the road than in the tier 1 cities. Maintenance. So again, this maintenance plays a much bigger role, especially in the keeping the technology in place and keeping the emission factors in place, keeping your vehicle economy in place, fuel economy in place. But unfortunately, the maintenance program that we have, the PUC, pollution under check, it doesn't really help in a lot of ways in keeping the pollution under check, or in trying to understand whether vehicles are being maintained or not. There are big gaps there. When you start comparing the PUC program in India versus the PUC program in, let's say, in Europe or US or even in China. Because these are the main differences. For example, our tests are idling tests, which means that you take the car to a PUC center and they put a probe in the exhaust when the vehicle is not really moving; it's just idling there. You rev up and then they take some measurements. CO is a index percentage, which is measured with a very old index percentage, and they say that, okay, are you passed or not passed? VOC is also an old standard, it's not really updated. CO2 is not a standard, so they don't really measure it at all, because they don't even ask you, what kind of economy you're getting. More important, they don't even ask you like what's the odometer reading. So that even that is not noted at the PUC test. So a lot of detailed information that one could capture when a vehicle is going at least 2 or 3 times a year to get a test done is completely lost. And the key pollutants, especially for air, particulate matter, NOx, and SO2, they're not measured at all. So you don't even look at them. So one thing that we did take into consideration looking at a big PUC database, this is from Delhi and from Bangalore, is like how engine has deteriorated over with the age. So especially with the CO number. So the number itself is useless. We can't use it for calculating the emissions. But if you look at the delta, how the delta CO percentage has changed from one year to the other in these tests, we were able to build what we call as deterioration functions for the engines. And that in the absence of test surveys like these, we can actually use that deterioration function to further understand how engines are behaving in the city and make any corrections that are required for the emission calculations. measuring emission factors, and especially through this PUC program or any other program, it's a very important and necessary program that we really don't have in India at the moment, and at least in full scale. So this is, I mean, even in US, when they have a program like this, a very detailed one, Volkswagen tried to cheat them. Because the driving cycle is fixed wherever you go in the country, so the machine already knows exactly if the vehicle is on the dynamometer and a driving cycle has been started. So automatically it switches and starts giving you much better numbers in the test. And then once you get back onto the road, now it says that, okay, I'm not on the chassis dynamometer now because I'm seeing too much random driving cycle. So it goes back to, it turns off the catalytic converters for NOx, and you basically have much more NOx on the roads. So digitization is useful in some ways, but obviously these guys found a loophole to cheat. In India, we are not doing any of these tests, so we really don't know whether vehicles are adhering to any of the standards that we have in the system. So when we have Bharat 6 engines, but are they really adhering to those standards or not? So if we really do a emission factor test, so it's a very complicated and involved process. So something like, it would look something like this. This is the best example that I could find. It really explains how a real-time on-road emission test can be done. I really encourage you to go to this video, and it's a video and they have a lot of documents on it, on how to use PEMS, the portable emissions measuring systems, how to install it, what are the bottlenecks, and what are the corrections that you'll have to make with how you decide to put in the vehicle, and if you are using a fueled vehicle, let's say petrol or diesel, what kind of corrections will you have to make right away to make sure that you are adjusting for any local changes and stuff like that. It's a very beautiful video, and it explains a lot of things on how to get emission factors. In India, we have, this is the only sample that's available from 2006. There were some additional tests done in 2010, 2011, all of them at ARAI in Pune. But the sample size is really small. So in the 2006 sample, that was only 250 tests. So when we have 250 million vehicles on the road, testing only 250 vehicles, it's, I mean, beggars can't be choosers scenario. I mean, use it, but it really is not giving you a good sample size to represent what we're seeing in any of the cities. So if you really want to get into some of the emission factor work, there's a lot of work involved here. This is a new test. This is called a remote sensing test. So we're not really, this is ICCT has been doing. ICCT is the same group which was behind unraveling this Dieselgate scandal in US. So they have started doing this in Delhi. So they're collecting these remote sensing numbers for close to 100,000 vehicles at a cross section. So remote sensing, in the sense, it basically a laser is targeted exactly at the exhaust side, at the exhaust height, and when the vehicle passes, there's a speed bump there, so that to maintain the vehicle speed when it crosses that, and it records the black carbon reflectivity and the PM, and then a couple other pollutants, and it's immediately noted. So they were able to do this for about 10,000 cities, and we are hoping to see some results probably July or August. That's what they said. So we're really looking forward to what this database has to offer, which will be very different from what we had in the past. So what we will be seeing from this ICCT's example, this experiment, are like truly real-time emission factors, where the vehicles are on the road, means there's no way of cheating it. So the engines don't know that they're being tested, and we'll see, what the numbers will be, how different they will be. So it will be interesting. Then the last complicated part that I mentioned. So once we have all these numbers, you multiplied them and you got your emissions. But where do you put those emissions? If we're really talking about at a city level, how do we spread those numbers into various grids? So there are a lot of proxies. One is a zero order proxy is population density. You can basically say that, hey, where the population is, that's where the vehicle emissions are going to be, because that's where people are going to move around and stay in and go in and out. And in addition to that is the road network itself. So that will give you another proxy for road density. So if the roads are there, that's where the vehicles are going to move. So you can use that as a proxy. So you can go one level higher and say that, okay, let's take trucks. Trucks are not going to be on all the roads. Trucks are going to be only on the primary roads. So you make a layer of primary roads. So what you see in this animation, all these purple lines are basically primary roads, national highways and state highways. So all the trucks, majority of the truck emissions are going to be on these roads. So that percentage could, you can play with it afterwards. It could be anywhere from 70 to 80%. And you have these high density nodes within the airsheds, which means that that's a lot of intersection. There are a lot of smaller feeder roads are also congregated there, which means that there's a lot of origin destination action that going on in those grids. So you can use that as an additional proxy for understanding the movement. So, but these are all using free, open databases from OpenStreetMaps. We can do all that. So we also have a paid resource. Now they've become really, really expensive. So even we stopped using it. So from Google Maps API, they have something called a distance API. So in this API, if you define a origin and destination, if you say that, okay, I'm going from grid 123 to, let's say, grid 2000, what will be the optimal route? Then the Google API will basically tell you, okay, you're going from point A to point B, this is the path you take. And when we take that API, it has hidden information on for each of the segments, how much time it takes on a normal day and how much time it took taking vehicle into consideration. So the difference is basically because of congestion, okay, in that segment. So we were able to make these calls in different origin destination matrix combination. So in this top one, this is basically vehicles are moving. We drew origin destinations only within the grids which are already defined as very urban. So basically, we didn't go from one grid to the other, but movement is only within the grid. So it gave us some understanding of what the road network is within those grids and use that for some congestion analysis. And this one on the right hand side, all the movement is from the railway station to all the outer grids. Okay, and the same thing for from on all the urban grids to all the outer grids. So we noticed that this is how people are going to move from urban centric grids to the outer grids. So you don't have to use to define your spatial proxies. So you can actually use this is available, so we used it, but the difference between this right graph for Delhi and the left graph from OpenStreetMaps was about 40% in the total road density. So it basically means that if there is a road, doesn't mean that that road is used all the time. So what we got from this Google Maps API is the roads which are most used. And this is the same principle as the vehicles. I mean, we have registered vehicles, but what we're interested in is in-use vehicles. Same thing here. So we have a huge road network, but in-use road network is the most important one when it comes to distributing, spatially distributing where the emissions are going. And that congestion number, the vehicle speeds in each grid, that itself can be also be used for different purposes. One is trying to know where the hotspots are. And another one is building some temporal profiles by day, some diurnal profiles, like a weekend, how's the traffic, and weekdays, how's the traffic. We can develop some temporal profiles. Another thing can be and used as well is the vehicle speeds themselves. So if some particular grids, they show up as under 10 kilometers an hour at a particular, let's say rush hour at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., vehicles are moving at under 10 kilometers an hour. So which means that your dust emissions will be almost zero. Your road resuspension dust in those grids. So you basically use this information to cut down a fraction or a total of your road dust resuspension in this particular grid. And the vehicle speed picks up, then depending on your vehicle density in that grid, you have a dust emission source that can be activated again. Same thing with vehicle speeds lower, which means that engines are not operating at the optimum condition, which means your combustion inefficiency kicks in. You will have higher CO and VOCs. So you can actually alter, you can actually create a diurnal cycle for your fleet emissions for pollutants other than PM. So we used it. It really helps in the understanding of the photochemistry, in the ozone photochemistry. So the rush hours, you have a much higher CO and VOCs, which means that your oxidation capacity is much higher. And it basically eats up pretty much all the NO, NO2 that's coming up, and you had a lower ozone, which is typical that we have seen. And then in the afternoons, when the speeds are higher, efficiency is higher, so you have normal CO, VOC emissions along with your NOx emissions. So you have a different photochemical range, and then ozone starts producing in the afternoon hours along with the sunlight. So we were able to capture some of these differentiations much better using some of these temporal profiles. So it can be used. The only drawback of this exercise is that it's a paid process, it's a paid exercise, and these days it's very, very expensive to get out of anything out of Google. So we've done this for about 30 cities. So the databases are available. Now these are 3 years old, but if anybody's interested in taking a look at it and use it for any of their purposes, just send us an email and we can give them a copy of this. So overall, it's never enough. More data is always useful. So more resources come in, we can do a lot more things. What thing, this is the last thing that I'll show you, like what are the things that one can do? And I'll go a little bit more deeper in the later session, but I wanted to give you a flavor for this. When we have videos explaining how this tool works, and you can just download it on our website directly. And if you go to the website, it's under the tools. Resources and tools, you can just download this, and there are videos explaining each of the modules. You can go through all these afterwards. So let's say, and this tool includes everything: transport, industries, waste burning, and everything. If let's say you have an emission baseline, and then you have basically come up with a way to translate the emissions into concentrations as well. So you have a gridding process in place, and everything is running in Excel, so you can actually see where all these numbers are coming from. So you went from emissions to concentrations, and then these concentrations, you can use it for some health impact analysis, and you also have some source profiles as well. So we can reset the whole thing. Let's say somebody said that I want to reduce PM10 and PM2.5 emissions by 20%, and this is my laundry list of actions that I can actually use in the city. So you can use the solver function, and it comes up and says, okay, if you do this so much, it's going to cost you so much. So these cost curves are again subject to, so we built these cost curves. So if you're actually using it for the case study, you have to adjust the cost curves. It basically says cars, diesel to electricity, 18% of the fleet, cars, diesel to CNG, about 16%. Majority is a paved road wet cleaning is about 70%. Because we are focusing only on PM, primarily on PM, so obviously the intervention went directly to an intervention which focuses on PM, and it gives you a solution. So you can save this solution, you can reset it and says, okay, I'm not interested in sorry. Yeah, I'm not interested in PM10 or PM2.5, but I am interested in SO2. Okay, I want to reduce SO2 20%, and you can solve it. Then it will basically now try to focus on an intervention which will actually give you this is coal to LPG in the domestic sector if you do 100%, and then if you do some inspection and maintenance, especially, and obviously this is going to diesel cars, and there you will have increased efficiency. Then you will have a least cost answer, and it will cost you so much. But your target was 20% SO2, you got it 20%. But at the same time, these are all co-benefits. You will get 5% of PM10, 7% of PM2.5, some NOx and some CO2. So like this, you can play with it. We put in some minimum functions. So let's say a city decides that, okay, I'm going to do 20% of the fleet is going to diesel to CNG anyway of the buses. So that's going to be minimum. Now I want to reduce 20% of PM10, 20% of PM2.5, and I also want to do 20% of CO2. So what kind of solution will I get? Given a new set of constraints, this 20% and 20% in CNG, diesel to CNG conversion. So now you will see that this 20% is going to happen by default because it's already put there 20%. So in addition to that, you will have to do these things, and you will get your targets 20% and 20% and 20%, and these are your core benefits. So this is some laundry list, but there is no limit to it. In Excel, we've tried this for about 40 options. You can add in about 40 different options. You make sure that they're all linked to right pages, and how to link these and how each of these pages work. There are these videos. Take a look. So the idea is there are a lot of information available. So you should be able to, you have to be in a position to understand whether a particular information is useful for me or not useful for me, and how I can use it for building some of these linkages. The linkages basically go back to this. So how do I make these linkages so that I can will end the resources presentation, and in the afternoon we'll go into some of the applications and some storylines. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, everybody still there?
Yeah. So we'll get the questions now. So those of you are, you can put the questions on the chat. So before that, before we get the questions on the chat, Sarath, I had one question. Like, we are generating a lot of data, like from your urban emissions also, we are getting a lot of data. But how it is coming, like for the government policy, from the on the policy side, how this data is being used up?
In different forms. So for example, in case of Patna, the Pollution Control Board was directly involved, and we basically showed them what we're already doing under the Apna City program, and we do better. So then that opened up a lot of doors, and we were able to do the surveys. So generally, if we had gone and asked for permission to do the surveys, it would have taken, I don't know, months, 2 months, maybe 1 year. But in this case, we told them, okay, we want to do surveys at these 10 particular stations, and we got the permission in the evening. because they were directly involved in that. But taking a step back, one of the things that made it possible is what I really feel is doing some of the work in the background and showing it to them how those numbers work. That really helped them, helped us, and pushing them to open some of these doors for us. And then they can use it for other purposes on their own.
So in terms of and also the other aspect is, see, we are getting this air pollution data. And are there studies happening where this data is being correlated with the health impact data? Are we seeing the change in the health impact?
Change, I'm not sure, because right now most of the work is only on the some of the epidemiological work. So there are at least two groups that I know are heavily involved in some of this epidemiological work. So one is the C. Ramachandra Medical College in Chennai. Dr. Kalpana Balakrishnan, she leads most of the work, and she's basically the person to go to if you want to do epidemiological work. And in the north, you have ICMR with PHFI, which is the Public Health Foundation of India. The PHFI has a lot of branches. I think they have a branch in Kolkata also, and they've been coordinating all the COPD, ischemic heart diseases, heart attacks, diabetes. Now they're also looking at Alzheimer's. If there is in US and EU, they've already done some of this work, and they've already created a causal relationship with even diabetes and Alzheimer's. But now they're trying to do the same here as well. So if there are any benefits because of the policies, that part is completely subjective to our own models. But the EPI work is happening. So a lot of these causal relationships are now being generated with data collected and worked with in India. And to be fair, like whatever causal relationships that we are coming up with are very similar to what we found in US and EU. There is no reason why they should be any different. Humans are humans, lungs are the same, pollution is the same, and we probably breathe a lot more than they do. But the causal relationships are coming out to be very similar.
And since we are talking about like air pollution, and these days hot topic is our electric vehicle.
Yeah.
So electric vehicle, based on, I think it's too early to see it's in fact hardly any, we don't see much electric vehicle yet in the ground yet, but in future, how do you see that going to change our ambient air pollution?
It will change quite a bit depending on where you are. For example, let's take Delhi. So this is actually something I will talk about afterwards. Let's say Delhi. You best or the gambit of source apportionment works. Then they'll come up with a number saying, okay, 20% of the pollution is from transport. Of the 20%, 20% or 20% is cars. So which is 4% of the total pollution. So if we translate that 50% of the cars to EV, which means 2% reduced. So when we start breaking out numbers like these, it looks like the change, benefits that we're going to see is really small, but every small benefit will really add up, and we will have much bigger benefits immediately. So this is looking from a pollution perspective, pollution source apportionment. So there's another angle. This is the health angle that people have been using now significantly, what do we call as an intake fraction basis. So the amount of pollution that we breathe from a particular source is much higher than what it is actually contributing to the ambient. That's the intake fraction. So intake fraction for, let's say, pollution from cars will be much higher than intake fraction of emissions that are coming from a power plant. So even though on the pi scale, pollution pi scale, the benefits could be summed up to only like 2% for cars, but from a health perspective, that could be up to 10%, because on the roads or side of the roads, waiting for things or walking around and things like that, depending on and because our amount of time spent outside is a lot more than the other countries. So taking the exposure time into effect, taking the fact that cars are usually ground level and they're very immediate to our at the breathing scale, your intake fraction is much higher. So from a health perspective, the percentage number will be much higher in case of EV compared to a pollution pi analysis.
Okay, that's good. Any other question, Ravi? Ravi, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you take it up, like any follow-up questions from there?
In chat, there are no questions, sir.
Yeah, but take it.
So participants, if they're having any queries and questions, they can unmute and ask the questions.
Okay, if not, then I think it's 1 o'clock now. So we'll again meet at 3 anyway.
Yeah,
So we'll take up, yeah.
So yeah, go through the website, some of the tools that I've showed you, the CEMARE tool, and have some questions ready. I'll show you some more. I'll demo some more tools afterwards in the afternoon to answer some of these policy questions. Hopefully, more neurons will connect and ask more questions.
Okay, Sarath, then we'll meet at 3.
We'll meet at 3. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.